Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video. Myself, Jonathan MS Pierce. This is Ukraine War News Update, the first part thereof for the, 20th of October 2025. I've done two breaking news updates already today, talking about various things. We're going to start with the Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply, of course, to these, and you can find them linked in the description below. We have 890 personnel lost, which is quite a big downtick from what we have seen. It was 1,000 yesterday, but it was up to 1,200 at one point or so. So back down to the 800s now. Two tanks there, no troop-carrying AFVs, 45 artillery systems. They're really going hard still at artillery systems. That's good news, and yeah, the Russians must be suffering now. I'd love to know what the accurate firing rate between the two sides, the ratio is between the two sides. We had heard that the Ukrainians had reduced the Russian fire rate to something like 2-to-1 ratio. And it was, different claims, 10-to-1, 6, 7-to-1, various points of the war, just a lot more artillery shells fired by the Russians on a daily basis than the Ukrainians. It could be that Ukrainians have ramped up their fire rate as well as attriting the Russian pieces to get that much closer to parity. I'd like to know what it is now, to be honest. Some claiming, I was seeing an analysis yesterday saying, well, actually, now there's all this capacity in the European and American artillery shell production that you're wondering whether, because a lot of investment goes into that, whether the state of the war in terms of drones being much more prevalent has meant that it's going to get to a point where actually they're producing too much artillery ammunition now after all this whinging about they need to ramp up. Of course, this was the worry for private companies, is that, well, if we have to invest in all of this capital to get the production up to a certain level, and there aren't the sustainable orders going forward because actually war is changing, and artillery, although it is still used, won't be used to quite the degree people are thinking, because actually drones are much cheaper and much more effective in certain contexts than artillery. Then maybe we need to be concentrating on drone production rather than artillery production, so artillery ammunition production. So all of those kind of conversations I think are being had. We have 45 artillery systems, 1 anti-aircraft warfare system, that's pretty useful, and 94 trucks and vehicles and fuel tanks and whatnot. Fairly decent number there. Okay, so what other information do we have? What other videos and whatnot to support these sorts of claims? Here we have a montage video showing a number of things. First of all, a drone trying to take out another drone. There's a bit of a drone fight here. Turns around, and then Bosch, these drones have a go at each other. But then mainly we're looking at equipment here. Multiple drones for vehicles. We see one drone has just sat down on the floor to watch the other drone take out a truck. What I always find interesting is the types of vehicles that are blown up here. We have quite a number of trucks. You look at the top of that. The top of this vehicle, there's so much you can derive from actually looking at these vehicles. These are all anti-drone, it appears, bits of kit, but we've also seen things like buckets and like plastic basins and whatnot turned upside down, painted and put on the trucks, because some military districts have said that you're not allowed to drive your Russian armored vehicle, Russian combat vehicles, whatever vehicle, anywhere without electronic warfare kit on top. And because there isn't enough electronic warfare kit, they end up putting pretend kit on the top of these vehicles sometimes to say to the bosses, look, we have got equipment so we can leave the base or whatever. So it might be that isn't genuine electronic warfare equipment. It does look, interestingly arranged, but it could well be as well. And if it is, then they are putting all sorts on top of their vehicles. Here we have just a regular car, another Bukanka taken out there. Here we have that vehicle with the electronic warfare on top, hit maybe first, or maybe it's a similar one, and another Bukanka, trucks, all sorts of vehicles getting taken out here by these drones, showing you, and I'm sure that's going for the fuel tank at the side there, 3 different vehicles looking the same, rather than, I assume it's not 3 failed attempts or a couple of failed attempts first, but all sorts of vehicles being used by the Russian military here. And all of these vehicles are getting taken out one by one. Motorcycles, as well as, all sorts of motorcycles, as well as trucks, bukankers, and that looks like an armoured. Oh no, it looked like maybe a tank or a self-propelled gun with a shovel on the front. Self-propelled gun there. So quite a lot of artillery we've seen on the list over the last week or so. It could well be that, the Ukrainians are having a successful time of acquiring these targets and then taking them out. Anyway, I thought I'd show you a whole lot of that to give you the sheer scope of what these, in this case, fiber-optic drones are able to do. Then we have another video here, although the first shot is of another interceptor drone, it seems, getting taken out by an interceptor. So an interceptor on the interceptor, then a Lancet, then pretty much Molniya drones. So Ukraine's 427th Separate Unmanned Systems Regiment, Rarog, shared a compilation of its interceptor drones shooting down about 100 Russian drones built by Dikisheshny engineers for the Ukrainians. Most are Russia's cheapest Molniya 1 and Molniya 2 types, plus a single Lancet loitering munition and an FPV drone. So it might not be an interceptor they're taking out, but just another FPV drone. We'll just look at the first bit, otherwise it then gets repetitive. So we've got an FPV drone by the looks of it there, getting taken out, and then a Lancet, but then everything else. And you can see there was another drone going for that Molniya. So sometimes these, and we've seen this previously, there's a battle to take out some of these drones as there are multiple FPVs trying to have a go at it. These are cheap and cheerful Molniyas, but they're pretty effective. The Russians are really using them to a pretty substantial degree. They are able to make an absolute ton of these Molniyas and use them into that kind of near rear. So the Ukrainian interceptor drones are providing a very useful job here, and the count goes up and up and up, and it reaches about 100. So 100 of these drones taken out by a single unit there. That shows how many are used. Now we hear that Ukrainian military forces are using British OneWeb satellites. So they've obviously been relying very heavily on Starlink, provided by Elon Musk, but they have been using British OneWeb satellites to control unmanned boats in the Black Sea alongside the American Starlink system, Russian security agencies have reported. So the Russians love to blame the British for stuff. The information was obtained after the seizure of a Ukrainian unmanned boat carrying the necessary equipment. It might be the one that we saw captured off. I have seen that one with that mast taken down, but actually the one captured off Tuapse or nearby Novorossiysk recently had hangers on for drones, so it wasn't that one. That was another one though. Right, Ukrainian troops have eliminated Russian infiltrators who killed civilians in Pokrovsk. So there is a pretty horrific video that is out. I won't show it to you, but it's basically civilians being executed or having been executed by Russian infiltrators in Pokrovsk. So a grandfather and others killed by Russians. It is pretty horrible. There's a still from it. It's absolutely not cool at all. But I presume it's in answer to the Russians doing that Ukrainian troops supposedly eliminated Russian infiltrators who had killed civilians in Pokrovsk. A Russian sabotage group managed to sneak into the city under a centre and murdered several civilians near the railway station. 7th Rapid Response Corps, the air assault forces, then tracked them down, hiding inside the station building, and took them out with a swift operation. Over 2 days, Ukrainian defenders eliminated 14 Russian operatives who have infiltrated the besieged city from multiple directions. Now, it is looking a bit of a problem, Pokrovsk and Myrnohrad. The Russians really do have the upper hand and are very much inside the city. The question is, how long is it going to take them? Will the Ukrainians pull out? Will they want to pull the Russians actually into fighting a street battle and get really intensely attrited? I don't know, because of course that would be attritional for the Ukrainians as well. A car was blown up this morning in the Holosivsky district of Kiev. According to the National Police, an explosive device went off under the driver's seat. Fortunately, there was no one in the cabin. The police and the SBU are investigating the incident, so that's lucky that no one was killed with that, but leaves you wondering who set that and who it was intended for. Right now, on to distance strikes. And yeah, so we have 63 missiles and drones, mainly drones, flying into Ukraine. 60 drones, 3 Iskander-M ballistic missiles. None of those ballistic missiles were intercepted, and 38 out of the 60 Russian drones were intercepted, which leaves 22 to have got through, and that's quite a high number. That's over. So what does that give us? That's going to be less than 66%, isn't it? Interception rate, which is a very poor interception rate, although it's not the biggest number of drones. As I've mentioned very often, the fewer the drones, the more you can get away with a worse interception rate. Okay, multiple explosions were heard in Odessa region as a swarm of drones attacked the port of Pivdeny, about 30 to 40 kilometers northeast along the coast of Odessa city. So that seems to have been one of the main targets for the Russians last night. Some serious damage possibly done to Pevdeny port there. Explosions were also reported in Pavlohrad, Dnipropetrovsk region, and in Sumy region. So, but the heaviest strikes remain near the front line in Free Donetsk. Another drone swarm hit Sloviansk. There are fires at the impact sites. No official news yet. So, yeah, really problematic for a number of areas, but particularly near the front line, Odessa too. But have relatively little footage coming out from Ukraine. And like I say to you many times, that's usually not very good news for Ukraine. It usually means that something fairly sensitive has been hit, if you don't have anything more than sort of imagery like this from a great distance. You know, if you've got images of residential buildings being hit either out in villages or in the middle of towns and cities, then as horrible as that is, you kind of want that stuff to be hit rather than port infrastructure, as long as, you know, no one's killed and injured and stuff. Ideally, you want residential buildings damaged or destroyed, rather than key military or logistical infrastructure or energy infrastructure, because that is massively more problematic for Ukrainian society, really. Right, footage of the preparation and launch of unmanned light engine aircraft for strikes on Russia. So that's all we've got for Ukraine at the moment in terms of what struck Ukraine last night, knowing that there's probably a lot worse news than we have to hand. But here we have a much larger FAB 100, so not the bigger ones that the Russian jets are dropping on the Ukrainians that can get up to as much as 3,000, the FAB 3000. This is an FAB 100. You've got a couple of 120 millimeter mines. I think those are actually mortar bombs that are also attached underneath what looks like maybe a Foxbat A-22 or similar sort of light aircraft that have been turned into drones. And this is how they are being turned into kamikaze drones. Here there is a video accompanying that shows a vehicle going behind one of these drones, driving along. If I can make that a little bit bigger for you, driving along. They are controlling that drone from, by the looks of it, something like a mobile phone. No, he's just recording that actually. So it could well be that these people are just driving behind it. They're not to do with the control of it. Who knows? But anyway, interesting to see that footage. Right, Russia, an electrical substation exploded in Berezniki. So this happened while I was giving a live stream to you guys with Greg Terry, leaving part of the city without electricity and water in Perm region. 133,000 population. Electrical infrastructure failures in Russia are becoming a daily occurrence due to their overload. So we don't know if that for sure, why that exploded, but it could well be an overload as a result of the strikes that had taken place elsewhere. Russian electricity Infrastructure, said Igor Sushko 13 days ago, is entering a systemic crisis with a capacity shortage of 25 gigawatts, so 9% and growing, caused by network overload, worn out equipment and sanctions that have restricted access to technology, according to Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service. Meanwhile, Ukraine is exacerbating that problem on a nightly basis by also striking substations and trying to strike, as we saw a couple of nights ago, key node substations that provide stability inside and outside oblasts. You do that, and then it puts really significant strain on the network, and then it all goes wrong. That would be the intention. As a result of the attack, another attack, says Max 25, on a 220 kilovolt Kafa electrical substation near Feodosiya. One of the transformers was destroyed and the roof of the building was damaged, according to Dnipro Osint. So again, there's an example of trying to go for these substations around occupied territories and inside Russia. Now, major Russian gas... So it was relatively quiet as far as understanding if anything was struck inside Russia last night. I'm not aware of too much. Oh, also worth noting that a mine was struck with kamikaze Shahed drones. In fact, if I go and find this out, mine drones, let's see if I can find you the imagery. Shahed, mine, Shahed. That should hopefully bring up, here it is. So the moment Shahed struck a mine in the Dnipro-Petrovsk region, this happened yesterday, just as we were about to record. You can see the Shahed going down at a completely vertical level there. It makes it very difficult to shoot down in that terminal phase. And 192 miners were trapped underground. They were eventually all released, they're all evacuated, but this is what Russia is doing to the energy sector in Ukraine on a daily basis. Obviously, Ukraine are trying to do this to Russia to some degree, but the Russians really having some success and managed to trap 192 miners underground, but they have subsequently been freed. Okay. So going back to what Ukraine have done, they're taking out substations. And then we hear that a major Russian gas plant, this is the Orenburg gas processing plant that was hit 2 nights ago. It's been forced to suspend gas intake following the Ukrainian drone strike. Now, this intake comes from Kazakhstan. I don't know if there's going to be any ramifications to this happening, because obviously this is Kazakhstani gas coming into Russia following a Ukrainian drone strike at the facility, according to Kazakhstan's energy ministry, announcing that the plant, which is located in southwestern Orenburg Oblast and is the largest of its kind in the world, was targeted in a drone strike, Ukraine's military said earlier in the day. And indeed, it is either continuing to burn or has started burning again. The implication here is it started burning again. A large-scale fire has once again erupted at the Orenburg gas processing plant with an annual capacity of up to 45 billion cubic meters of gas, so the largest in the world. That's special Kherson-Kat. That is what it looked like on the night that it was attacked. It's a Gazprom processing plant, but as we've heard, it stopped receiving gas from Kazakhstan following that attack. And that's the latest. So this is this morning. A large-scale fire has broken out again on the territory of the Orenburg gas processing plant there, and it is seriously burning there. As you can see, that's not just a flare from a chimney. That is some burning gas. So success there for the Ukrainians, but don't know whether there will be a bit of an international issue, given that could affect Kazakhstan negatively. Now, Zelensky says that, first of all, I'd like to say that European countries also have Tomahawks. So we're talking about these long distance cruise missiles that Ukraine would like to get their hands on, but the US was going to give them to Ukraine, it appeared, and then they took a call from Putin and changed their minds. The issue isn't just the Tomahawks themselves, says Zelensky, it's the use of the weapons. You can have ATACMS, but how can you use them? The issue is, how can you use them? In other words, it's not just about getting the Tomahawks, but having permission to use them against whatever you like versus what the Americans stipulate. We spoke with the European leaders immediately after our meeting with President Trump. They want to approach him themselves with the request. Trump isn't handing over Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine because he doesn't want to escalate relations with Russia until he meets with Putin. So this is the idea that actually Ukraine could receive Tomahawks from other nations who themselves have bought Tomahawks previously off the United States. And if they're happy with stockpiles dwindling in other nations, then, because at the end of the day, right, somebody's buying these Tomahawks off the US. So if the US is going to sell these Tomahawks to, I don't know, let's make up a nation like Netherlands is going to buy Tomahawks off the US to give to Ukraine. So those Tomahawks will go from US stocks, and then I presume the money to replenish them will come from the Netherlands. Like, you're buying them directly off the States, but they're all coming from the stocks. And the reason why the US weren't going to give them is because their stocks are so valuable. But of course, you should be able to still buy these from source. They still manufacture them. So, okay, there's an element there. Or you buy them or donate them yourselves from, so say the Netherlands has a bunch of Tomahawks, they then give Ukraine a bunch of Tomahawks and then buy them directly from the States. It's, unless there's a major markup with and a difference between buying them from the US stockpiles and then buying them directly from the manufacturers, that could be a more expensive way of doing it. But either way, you are demanding that US, or there's a requirement that the US are manufacturing these Tomahawks to replace stockpiles that depleted either in the US or abroad in Europe. So if the US's position is to say no because of the worry of US stockpiles, then they don't have a right to say no due to European stockpiles, because that's not their concern, right, necessarily. And so if the Netherlands want to give up a bunch of Tomahawks and then order some more from the defense industry in the US, I'm sure the US, well, technically they should be absolutely fine with that, because their manufacturing facilities are getting those orders in, and that's tax income coming into the US and continued employment. If they say no to Europeans requesting Tomahawks go to Ukraine, then it's an ideological thing here. It's about escalation management rather than stockpiles. And actually, there are claims that the Americans have been afraid of escalation, and that's what changed Trump's mind. So Putin phoned up and then said, "You do this, we're going to do this," and then Trump changed his mind by being a bit of a Jake Sullivan, by being afraid of escalation and its escalation management. Now, in terms of drones, and we've heard that, in fact, we're hearing this morning that is it Mallorca airport, so in the Balearic Islands in the Mediterranean, Spanish islands are very popular for holiday makers going there from the UK, particularly. We a lot of Brits go to Mallorca and Menorca. So Mallorca's airport is closed due to drone activity. Now, Tim White says the UK Defence Minister John Healey will this evening announce plans to allow the armed forces to shoot down drones threatening its military bases. That's in the UK. I was wondering how the military didn't have this authority already, says Tim White. Well, actually, this has been the same right across Europe, and everyone's had to change their rules in line with drone threats. But the new measures will cut out the need to get higher authority. So that's really good news there. I support that move. Now, let's look at, in the other bits and pieces here, at the Russian economy. Russia is approaching default, says Evgen Istrubin. In September, 16.3% of the federal budget expenditures were spent on servicing domestic debt in the form of bonds, right? So that is a growing amount of money. I mean, much of the world is struggling with this at the moment. UK, our debt servicing is going up. With the US, is going up hugely with a big, beautiful bill that's going to push the debt ceiling up and push debt servicing up. Well, okay, but in Russia, that is happening to a serious degree. The share of expenditures allocated to servicing the national debt over the first 9 months amounted to almost 8%. This is 50% more than in 2024, when 5.4% was spent servicing. So you've gone, 5.4%, 8%, 16.3%. It's not looking good for the Russians here. Here's a graph showing the expenditures of the federal budget of the Russian Federation, expenditures on servicing the public debt in billions of rubles, and a share of expenditures spent on servicing the public debt in percentages. So it says, that's coming up to 8% there, which is already going up hugely from as you can see from 2018 there. It's double what it was back in 2018, pretty much double what it was in 2022. But in September, it's going to be 16.3%. So that's another 100% on top of that, it appears. So although that's just a monthly figure, that will push this, because this is 2025, we're still in 2025, and we still have a number of months left. So, it's looking like the overall annual expenditure will shift up towards 8%. That's how I understand that. Government debt servicing costs have been growing by an average of 40 to 50% annually for the past 5 years. That is definitely a challenge for the Russians, but this is only the visible portion of the expenses. There's also an invisible portion, preferential loans that the government forced banks to issue to defense industry companies, as well as preferential mortgages. Thus, expenses are 1.5 times higher, already exceeding 11% of total budget expenditures. And now the most interesting part, budget revenues are not growing. Over the past 9 months, they've grown by only 2%. Things will get even more interesting. We haven't, so in other words, no more extra money is coming in, but servicing the debt is getting more and more expensive. So you're squeezing the budget even more. Things will get even more interesting. We haven't yet seen the impact of the budget of last week's drop in oil prices, nor the increased impact on oil refineries. This will lead to an even greater decline in budget revenues. Consequently, the ability to service the national debt will become even worse, which in a war situation will lead to an increased risk of default. And then, you could be talking in terms of huge inflation, hyperinflation, I don't know, all manner of things could go wrong. According to Spur Index, real consumption in Russia fell 0.8% in real terms. So in other words, they're not consuming as much stuff as they did. It has dropped. Fell 0.8% in real terms last week compared to last year. Recession and unemployment have begun again, says Evgen Istrobin. So here we have the nominal and the real nominal in purple, real in blue, and the 0% line here dropping to negative 0.8%. That is the it's been going down and down and down, but when you're going to negative growth, that means like the growth has been dropping. The more stuff people are consuming more than they did last year, but that has been going down. The amount of extra stuff has been decreasing year on year or month on month on an annual basis, but we've got now to a negative point. A real challenge there. For the Russians, the Russian Ministry of Finance is preparing to sharply increase government debt. On October the 17th, says Evgen Istrobin again, 5 new bond issues were registered totaling 4.25 trillion rubles. So that adds, so you've got already, they're spending more and more and more on servicing debt. Then you've got people are spending less money on stuff. They're consuming less, which means you're going to get less kind of taxes in. Then you are getting less revenues in general because the revenues are going down. The economy seems to be in a pretty poor shape, and also oil revenue and gas revenue is being hit massively, not only in terms of the amount you're getting per barrel or per cubic meter, but also the amount of that stuff you are selling or able to sell because your refineries are being absolutely hammered. All of this is really hurting the budget, and then you're adding further government debts by issuing new bonds. The increase in bonds in circulation since the beginning of the year has reached 4.165 trillion rubles. It just appears to be going, well, the idea there is exponential in terms of, you got 4.165 trillion and you're adding another 4.25 trillion to that with new bond issuances. Wow. Not looking particularly good there. Now, the Russian hackers, so I'm moving. No, actually, I want that to come later. We'll do that later. Okay. Russian grey imports to support the war effort are facing a crisis following simultaneous crackdowns by Chinese, Kazakhs, and Russian custom officials. Thousands of truckloads of drone parts and medical supplies are said to be on the border. Much of the frontline Russian army supplies come from humanitarian aid, scare quotes, organised by volunteer groups who purchase supplies from Chinese companies and ship it overland to Russia, either directly across the Chinese border or via Kazakhstan, which is cheaper. However, multiple Russian war bloggers say that the customs services of all three countries have cracked down on grey imports, or for differing reasons. They warn that this threatens a crisis for the front lines and the loss of many Russian soldiers' lives. Doctors, You're Not Alone, which buys that's the name of the outfit, which buys and distributes medical supplies for the front, writes on its Telegram channel, "It's been 5 weeks since I was somewhere at customs in the Samara region, to customs, after customs, and at storage warehouses. There are thousands of trucks loaded with cargo from China. Let me clarify, I'll label rumours with a smiley face. We aren't directly involved ourselves, but rumours are all we were left with." So this is what we've been stuck what has been stuck here for over a month now. 20,000 bandages, 5,000 first aid pouches, 10,000 tourniquets, 10,000 automatic scissors, so on and so forth. Whole big list there. Did you consider yourself a monster of volunteer planning with an inexhaustible stockpile of necessary supplies lasting a month? Well, there you have it. And not just you, me too. My fellow volunteers have Starlink, circuit boards, radios, fabric and other things in stock for the same month plus. The rumour mill has been full of all sorts of things this month. This was before the negotiations with Kazakh President Tokayev. This is not being caused by ours, it's the Kazakhs. This is not being caused by the Kazakhs, it's ours, because trucks stopped 60 kilometers after the border. And these are all the rumors here. This is to kill cargo imports and force everyone to import through regular customs system. That's another rumor. They are looking for drones and their components. Another rumor, that would be the Russian side of things there. And the trucks with white cargo are also stationary, etc., etc. If we were to list all the rumours surrounding the transport and customs collapse, we'd be forgiven for believing in an interplanetary conspiracy. The consequences of the collapse, specifically for Doctors You Are Not Alone, we're already buying what we need in Moscow at prices as high as double. For example, we used to bring bandages from China for 120 to 135 rubles, but this week we had to buy 5,000 at 240 rubles. Do I need to explain to you what happens when you can only buy for twice the price? Miracles don't happen. You'll just end up buying half as many, so on and so forth. So this, I mean, it's a massive long thread. I think it's up to 34 or something. This is a really, really big problem for these people wishing to supply the front lines. So yeah, I'm just going to list some of these reasons at the end, but to summarise, we expect a certain shortage of dual-use goods at least until this issue is resolved, plus a time lag until everything gets back to normal. The Kazakhstan option may not even be an option. Points 2 and 3 seem quite solvable, so they're looking at like some ways around this. Advice: if you have a high need for such products, buy them now and stock up, especially if prices are still within a reasonable range. Things could get much worse and more expensive later. We are monitoring the situation and we'll keep you updated. Again, adding to the woes there. Now, speaking about Russian budgets and what they are going to spend, according to Andrei Sabihar, the Minister of Foreign Affairs for the Ukrainians, Russia is to increase propaganda spending by 54% in 2026. Now, that should be a concern for all of us outside of Russia. This clearly indicates the priorities of the aggressor state. They cannot win on the battlefield, so they rely mainly on disinformation. Super concerning that. Now, on the cyber front, Russian hackers have hit 8 UK military bases and posted Ministry of Defence staff names and emails on the dark web, according to the Daily Mirror. The MOD is now investigating the massive breach that is suspected of being carried out by the Russian group Lynx. This should be all over the news. This should be like massive news in the UK, because this is a clear understanding. It shows a clear understanding that the Russians are the bad guys here, and they are attacking us, and we are involved in a war with Russia. Now, the EU is planning its most daring attack on Russia's shadow fleet. Foreign ministers will be briefed at their meeting tomorrow. New powers to board vessels for inspection are drawn up to counter threats to safety and to the environment. I think there is a ship called the Falcon floating around at the moment, which is worrying a lot of people as well. One of the Russian shadow fleet has been abandoned. It will also allow them to check for drone launches and sanction evasion. This is huge. And in fact, The Austrians have been holding back the 19th package of sanctions due to Raiffeisenbank. Now that that has been resolved, it looks like the 19th package of sanctions against Russia will be approved fully and properly on October the 23rd. Quote, we are expecting this week also to adopt the 19th package of sanctions. Unfortunately, not today, but we have also a leaders meeting coming up on Thursday, said Kaja Kallas from the EU there. So that was the Austrians being difficult with that one by all accounts. And finally, Russia has rejected Trump's plan, which is freezing the front lines. This is Peskov, Dmitry Peskov saying, Russia's negotiating line regarding stopping troops in existing positions remains unchanged. In other words, we ain't up for it. So there you go. Anyway, that's enough from me. I really appreciate your support. Thank you so much for your support. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.